Well, a recent report by the Urban Institute found that 35% of Americans have debt and unpaid bills that are reported to collection agencies.
Yeah, which means it's probably gotten to a pretty serious level at that
right.
point. Now, these bills range in everything from credit cards and mortgages to gym memberships. Past due bills can hurt your credit score and even job prospects. So how can you prevent this from happening to you? Joining us now is Chris Bridges, a certified credit expert. Good morning, Chris. Thanks for coming in.
Good morning, Chris.
So I guess the first question that I had is, do people always know when their bills have gone to collection, or sometimes are there bills out there they weren't aware of?
Well, I would venture to guess that we sort of know
Okay.
whether you may have gotten a statement in from the original creditor. It doesn't mean that they're calling you all the time, and they don't necessarily warn you to say, hey, the next time the next call, you're going to collection. But typically, a collection is a result of an account that's gone delinquent for about 180 days.
Okay.
And so when it gets to that point, it's serious.
It's pretty serious. And I was listening, watching you talking about the type of accounts. I've seen $5 overdue library books go to collection.
No, that's painful.
See, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Some of these little things.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the thing is, like, sometimes, people don't realize they're in debt. You just kind of stack up on spending. What are the early signs or the warning signs of developing debt?
Well, I think if you're using debt or leveraging your debt, whether it's credit cards or any other type of debt, as a necessity, that's when it should be a sign. So, credit card debt should be more of a convenience. You're charging something with the intent on paying it back. Maybe at the end of that month, even that would be our best case scenario. But when you start leveraging and using your extended of credit or debt as a necessity to get by, that's when there's a concern.
Right. Well, nowadays there are so many people living paycheck to paycheck, and I know the best financial advice might be always have an emergency fund ready to go. I've heard that many times, but the reality is a lot of people can't do that or save money. So your best advice for people in that situation?
You're right. As a matter of fact, the statistics here in Washington, D.C. is 40% of people who live in Washington, D.C. have at least one collection.
Wow.
And so that is the reality. There are a lot of families that are struggling with that type of debt. I would say just really try to stay on top and communicate with your creditors.
Oh.
Make sure that if there is an account that is going into default, maybe there's a financial hardship, just make sure that you're communicating with your creditors. A lot of times you can work out either a payment arrangement or even a settlement. So a lot of people don't realize that you can settle on debt. It doesn't have to be years old. It can be, maybe a hospital bill that's come in. That's usually what gets people in trouble is hospital bills. But you can settle it. Just communicate with the creditor and be able to work something out.
And sometimes can debt be okay if it's done responsibly?
Absolutely. There's good debt and there's bad debt. So there is such a thing as good debt. And that's what I mentioned. Sometimes you may want to go into some level of debt because it's a convenience.
Well, sure. I mean, we take car loans, we take mortgages.
Those two
right.
are, those are the
still
exceptions.
debt.
Yeah,
it's still debt.
they're debt.
Right.
But those are kind of the exceptions because most people are not going to pay cash for a home or even a car.
Right.
For that matter. Those are the two largest purchases. But for everything else that we get into, and also we focus on our needs and not necessarily our wants, right? So some things we can control, what type of debt we get into. But for the most part, we try to get into debt that we really, we have to, and again, it's a convenience and not something that we're using credit cards as a way of life. If we are, one tip I will share is if you have credit card debt and you're trying to pay it down, below 30% is the magic number to, improve your credit score, is to start paying your credit cards earlier in the month when they're due. Instead of waiting until the due date because you knock out, well, not only that, you're knocking out your interest. Credit card debt is based on average daily balances, right? So if you pay it off earlier in the reporting cycle or that credit card cycle, then you're going to cut out some of that interest.
That makes me so happy.
We always learn
I'm
something.
already doing that just because I'm a type A and I have a sense of urgency.
Good.
So I'm glad
We
there's a
always learn
benefit.
something when Chris comes along. Thank you so much for
Thank you so
joining us
much,
again.
Chris.